Today we're covering 6 of the most gut-wrenching safari attacks ever documented. From the banks of the Zambezi River, where a single photograph cost a woman her life, to the floodplains of the Okavango Delta, where a brief moment of curiosity separated one man from the group that could have saved him. We start at the edge of a river that had already shown every sign of what it contained. It was July 18, 2017, and the Zambezi River Valley sat in the dry season's defining quiet, the stillness that arrives when water is scarce everywhere except the river itself, drawing everything toward it in concentrated numbers. The banks held the compressed evidence of everything that had passed before: tracks pressed deep into the mud, slide marks near the waterline, worn channels where large animals had descended and returned. To someone unfamiliar with that ground, the river looked like a peaceful gathering place. To someone who knew what those marks meant, it looked exactly like what it was. Natalie Miller was 31, from Perth, Australia, and had spent 3 years saving for this trip. With a strong visual sense of what she wanted to capture: sweeping landscapes, animals at the water's edge, the kind of photographs that communicate wildness without communicating the conditions that make wildness dangerous. She worked as an administrative supervisor in Perth and was precise and capable in areas she understood, and genuinely impatient with caution elsewhere. By the 4th day, she'd grown attached to the river, remarking to others that it looked peaceful despite everything she'd heard before arriving. That morning, the guide pointed out fresh slide marks pressed into the mud, wide depressions, a large crocodile leaves hauling itself from the water and back. He said the displacement suggested they were only hours old. Most of the group stepped back. I'll be honest, fresh slide marks in crocodile country would have been enough for me. Full stop, turn around, back in the vehicle. It is already a very obvious warning sign that a crocodile is there, especially when you can't see it. The Nile crocodile isn't built for open pursuit. It manages distance and compresses opportunity. An adult can stay motionless beneath the surface for over an hour, only the ridges above its eyes breaking the waterline indistinguishable from debris at any range. What looks like rest is the animal waiting for a gap to close to a specific threshold, refined over millions of years against prey that, unlike modern tourists, evolved to read the signs. Once that threshold closes, the strike is explosive, covering the distance faster than most people can register it's begun. A large male can exceed 1,000 pounds and 16 feet. Natalie moved away from the group for a better angle, wanting the river behind her in frame, and descended the muddy slope to get it. The guide told her to step back. She kept moving, attention on her phone screen, her back partially to the water, exactly the condition the crocodile had been counting on. That detail matters. The decision to keep moving was made with full awareness that a warning had already been given. At this point, it's playing with the Grim Reaper. The crocodile had been motionless beneath the surface, likely for an extended period, waiting for the threshold distance to close. When Natalie descended the muddy slope with her back partially to the water, it launched. The strike was explosive. A Nile crocodile of significant size generates a bite force exceeding 5,000 pounds per square inch, among the highest of any living animal. It seized her leg, the jaws clamping with an immediacy that bypasses any reaction window. The animal then executed death roll, the rotational movement crocodiles use to disorient, subdue, and dismember prey, and dragged her beneath the surface. The sequence from first contact to full submersion lasted seconds. No one on the bank had time to move. The water closed over her with almost no surface disturbance. Search teams operating downstream in the days following recovered partial remains, consistent with a large crocodile feeding and dispersing. That's the detail people who haven't spent time around large crocodiles consistently underestimate. There isn't a build-up phase you can react to. The guy did everything correctly. The warning was specific and timely, and it still happened. Because being told something is dangerous and believing it applies to you right now are two different events. One is information, the other is belief. The guide leading the group had worked that stretch of the Zambezi for the better part of a decade, and later said the crossing point was one he actively steered groups away from, not because an attack was guaranteed there, but because the geometry of the bank and the volume of animal traffic using it made it the worst place along that section of river to stand close to the edge. Search teams downstream recovered what the slide marks had already said, that the bank she descended onto was an active crossing point. The outcome was written in the mud before the group arrived. One woman died at a river whose surface gave nothing away. The next involves a man who read the landscape with more skill than most people develop, just not in the one direction that would have changed everything. It was February 11th, 2016, and the morning in Rajasthan's dry scrubland carried the flat cold of an Indian winter. The canopy was dense enough to cut visibility to 20 or 30 yards, while the leaf litter underfoot swallowed sound. It was terrain where large animals moved parallel to people undetected, and where vertical space, everything above eye level, went almost entirely unmonitored by anyone on foot. Owen Taylor was 42, from Manchester, and had spent the better part of a decade as a wildlife photographer. Carrying the measured confidence of someone who treated dangerous animals as the background condition of the job, he'd spent the 3 days prior in India with a local guide, covering the terrain slowly and methodically. He understood how prey behavior signaled predator proximity and what a tight circle of vultures meant. What happened to him is not the story of someone who didn't know what he was doing. That morning produced exactly the signals his experience trained him to read: a tight spiral of vultures above the forest, then a group of chital deer moving in the rapid, directional pattern that signals a nearby predator not yet committed to a chase. Every observation he made was accurate. He worked toward a cleaner angle, telephoto raised, attention fixed on the deer. I think about this a lot, that you can do everything right and still end up in the wrong place. Owen wasn't careless. He was doing exactly what his training prepared him to do. But even with such experience, nothing could save him. The Indian leopard is compact and deceptively powerful. An adult female, 60 to 80 pounds, built with a muscle density and short-range explosiveness, photographs fail to communicate. A leopard that's made a kill hauls the carcass into a tree fork and stays nearby for days, feeding. An animal at an active cache is not passive, regardless of how still it sits. Anything that keeps advancing triggers a response sequence, signaled first by a low vocalization and a shift into a forward crowd. Owen had been tracking the deer correctly, following them straight to the source. What he hadn't done was look up. The tree he walked beneath held a partially consumed cheetal in a fork 15 feet off the ground, and the leopard was in the tree with it. Every instinct he applied was correct. The one variable his awareness didn't cover was vertical space, a very small gap, and it was the only one that mattered. And that's what makes this scary. You think everything is clear, but we mostly forget to look up. As Owen passed beneath the tree, the leopard shifted its weight. A low sound came from the canopy, the kind that registers as wrong before it registers as recognizable. In a blink of an eye, the leopard dropped from 15 feet with its full body weight, approximately 70 pounds, directed downward onto Owen as he stood beneath the branch. A leopard dropping from height uses its forelimbs to grip and its body mass to drive the target to the ground. The initial contact would have been the forepaws, claws, fully extended, striking the upper body or shoulders. The primary killing mechanism of a leopard is a precision bite to the throat or base of the skull. It suffocates or severs the spinal connection. The attack at that range and from that angle gave Owen no physical opportunity to respond. Guides who arrived within minutes found him alive, but with injuries to the throat and upper body that were not survivable. He died before he could be evacuated. 15 feet in an open field, that's nothing. Here is what an entire margin between warning and impact. Guides trailing behind reached the area within minutes. Owen was alive when they arrived, but the injuries weren't survivable. What makes a cache like this difficult to detect from the ground is that leopards are meticulous about concealment in a way few other predators bother to be. Unlike a lion or hyena, which will often leave drag marks or scattered remains around a kill, a leopard hauling a carcass into a tree removes almost all the ground level evidence that might otherwise tip off anyone walking beneath it. The vultures circling above were the only external indicator that something had died nearby, and even that pointed toward the general area rather than the specific tree. Investigators determined the cache had been made recently, and the leopard had rested near it for hours. The Chittle had been responding directly to its presence, the exact signal Owen had read correctly and followed straight to its source, without ever looking above himself. The next involves a man given every piece of information he needed, who chose not to follow any of it. It was September 22nd, 2015, and the dry season in Hwanghae National Park had reduced the landscape to austere clarity. Flattened grass, a thinned canopy, water holes, drawing animals from miles away. In terrain like this, an observer in an open vehicle can see a large animal clearly past 100 yards, and that visibility creates a reliable false confidence in people encountering it for the first time. Caleb Collins was 39, a sales manager from Johannesburg on his first safari. He was confident by disposition, described by people who knew him as someone who formed quick assessments and treated caution as optional rather than default. He had general outdoor experience from weekend hiking, but nothing that had prepared him for African wildlife at close range. He joined a group safari led by a guide who'd worked the park for years. The group encountered a large bull elephant feeding roughly 150 yards from the track. The guide stopped the vehicle and scanned the animal carefully, estimating him at 10 feet at the shoulder and identifying fluid running from the temporal glands and the swollen hindquarters. He explained to the group exactly what those signs meant and kept the vehicle stationary while he did. African bull elephants periodically experience a hormonal surge lasting weeks to months, during which the behavioral baseline shifts elevated aggression, a far lower threshold for offensive action, and a faster, less graduated response than the same animal produces otherwise. A bull in this state has been documented charging at speeds near 15 miles per hour, and an adult male can exceed 13,000 pounds. That mass and speed, at any distance a person can cover on foot, leave no survivable margin once it commits. The displays it produces before charging, ears spread, head raised, ground striking, are not ceremonies. They mark a decision point. What makes this condition so widely misread by first-time visitors is that the bull producing these signals often looks, from a distance, identical to any other bull they've already photographed without incident. There's no dramatic visual transformation. The physical changes are subtle enough that an untrained eye would have no reason to treat this encounter differently than the last one. That gap is precisely why guides identify the condition before anyone steps off the vehicle, not after. What happened next isn't a story about unclear communication. It's about someone who processed the information accurately and set it aside. Caleb got out of the vehicle and walked toward the clearing for closer footage. The guide told him to return immediately. I cannot get my head around this. The guide had just explained exactly what the animal was capable of, and the response was to open the door and walk toward it. The guide had just explained exactly what the animal was capable of. The bull was already in active threat state temporal gland discharge, swollen hindquarters, ears at full extension. When Caleb continued advancing, the charge committed. A bull elephant at 13,000 plus pounds, accelerating to 15 miles per hour, generates an impact force that has no survivable margin at direct contact. The animal struck him with its head and tusks. Elephants in a committed charge will gore, kneel on, and crush a target. The tusks of a large bull can exceed 6 feet in length and carry the full forward momentum of the animal behind them. Witnesses described the sequence from ear spread to contact as faster than the guide's warning had time to register. The bull remained at the site for several minutes, a behavioral pattern documented in musk bulls, continued aggression toward a downed target before withdrawal. Every warning that exists for this exact situation had already been delivered. The guide named the condition. The elephant displayed the precursors in sequence. Witnesses said the bull stayed at the site for several minutes before withdrawing. Park rangers who reviewed the incident pointed out that the entire visible sequence from the first ear spread to the moment of contact had taken less time than the guide's original explanation of the condition. The information had been complete. The response window it described was not. What came next involved no warning signals of any kind, only the sudden sudden revelation that a space had been shared between a person and a predator without either of them knowing it. It was May 6, 2014, and the late afternoon in the South African Lowveld had settled into the transitional hour the dry season produces as the sun falls long shadows, the air cooling fast, the landscape entering the window between afternoon inactivity and evening predator movement. The lodge area had produced consistent lion sightings through the dry season, and the staff understood the rhythm when the animals moved, where and which parts of the property sat inside that corridor. Megan Hall was 28 from Portland, Oregon, building a modest but growing following through wildlife and adventure travel content. Her approach rested on a specific premise that the most compelling footage came from positions other people weren't occupying, and that proximity and an exclusive angle produced what a standard guided experience couldn't. She'd been at a private Lowveld lodge for 3 days, filming lions from the elevated main deck each evening. This was not, by the accounts of people who traveled with her before, an isolated impulse. Friends described a pattern of quietly testing boundaries a tour or property had set, in small ways that never produced a visible consequence, standing closer to an edge than guides preferred, lingering after a group moved on. None of it had gone wrong before, and that absence of consequence seems to have functioned as evidence for the boundaries had more margin than they actually did. On the evening of May 6th, lions were heard vocalizing toward the riverbed before dark, and guests gathered on the main deck. A lion was spotted moving through the open ground below. Megan filmed it for several minutes, then left the deck. She'd identified a staff access trail earlier in the trip, narrow, running from the rear of the lodge buildings down through vegetation to the riverbed's edge, and took it while the group stayed above, unaware she had gone. This is the decision I keep circling back to. Lions are audibly active nearby. There is a confirmed sighting directly below, and the move is to leave the elevated, safe position and go down a trail alone at dusk for a better angle. The African lion is an ambush predator at the most fundamental level of its design. A lioness, typically 265 to nearly 400 pounds at maturity, is built for explosive short-range contact from concealment, not sustained pursuit, which carries an implication. People who've only watched lions from elevated positions rarely internalize. A lioness resting in heavy cover is not passive. She is oriented entirely toward a strike from stillness, and anything entering her space without warning gets a response that is immediate and total. Lions also operate in structured groups, where one visible animal is active, others are frequently nearby and unseen. Leaving the deck removed every layer of margin that had already existed before. Lions had been active nearby. She was alone, with no guide and no radio, and no one on the property knew she'd left. The lioness was in heavy cover at close range when Megan rounded the bend. An ambush predator at that distance responds before the person has processed what they are seeing. The initial contact was almost certainly a strike from the forepaws lionesses, typically between 260 to around 600 pounds, use their forelimbs to knock prey off balance and bring them to the ground. The killing bite follows typically to the throat to suffocate or to the back of the skull to sever the brainstem. At that proximity and in that terrain, the attack was total and immediate. Lodge staff reached the trail within minutes. The lioness had already retreated into the bush. The injuries were consistent with a large predator's close contact response, claw lacerations to the upper body, and a fatal bite to the throat region. What this consistently comes back to is that the lioness didn't select her, didn't track her. It reacted to a person who'd walked directly into its space without warning, exactly as that species behaves in that situation. The only unusual variable was the person on the trail. And that's what makes this one feel the most avoidable. It wasn't bad luck. A person walked into a space every safeguard on that property existed specifically to keep guests out of. The system worked exactly as designed. She just chose not to use it. The lodge reinforced the separation between guest areas and staff paths afterward. The lioness hadn't traveled to find her. The trail had brought Megan to the lioness. The next came from something quieter, a brief separation from a group that had moved safely through genuinely dangerous ground for 4 days without incident. It was August 14th, 2018, and the Okavango Delta in Botswana sat at the height of its seasonal flood. Water pushed south from the Angolan highlands in the slow spread that turns the delta into one of the most ecologically concentrated environments on the continent. On foot, a person occupies the same physical plane as everything else moving through it. No elevation, no glass, no vehicle. Travis Clark was 56, retired from a contracting career in Texas, and had taken up extended wildlife travel as his primary pursuit. He developed a patient, unhurried photography style, the kind that comes from learning that sitting and waiting outperforms moving quickly toward action. He was steady and deliberate, qualities that had served him well across 4 incident-free days with a small group led by a guide who ran independent routes vehicles couldn't access. Operators who run multi-day walking safaris in the Delta typically brief every guest on the same basic structure before the first morning out single file. Guide at the front, fixed spacing maintained, regardless of how interesting something on the ground might be. The briefing Travis received was no different, and he'd followed it without issue for 4 days. The morning of August 14th was the first time anyone had broken from it. A male African lion at full maturity typically weighs 330 to 530 pounds, with large individuals in prime wet season territory at the upper end of that range or above it. What distinguishes a male at an active kill is the compression of his defensive response. He's at the intersection of a resource that cost real energy to acquire and a perceived threat to it. And the window between detecting that threat and responding is far shorter than in most other contexts. He doesn't broadcast warnings from distance. He responds from close range. In dense wet season vegetation, a person's senses are nearly useless as advance warning of a predator working 40 or 50 yards off the trail. Travis noticed fresh lion tracks crossing the trail and stopped to crouch and photograph them. The guide, several yards ahead, registered Travis wasn't behind him and called back. This is the moment that becomes permanent once you trace it back. The safety model of a walking safari depends entirely on the group holding formation, the guide, the spacing, the collective awareness function as one unit. The instant that breaks, the whole structure goes with it.
I've gone back and forth on this one more than any other, because Travis didn't do anything that looked like a mistake.
He stopped to photograph tracks. That's exactly what you're there to do. The terrible part is that the thing that killed him was indistinguishable from a completely normal decision until it wasn't. The male lion emerged from vegetation already within the defensive perimeter of his kill, meaning Travis was not detected at distance and charged. He was already inside the response threshold when the lion registered his presence. At that range, a lion weighing upward of 400 pounds closing from concealment is on a person before the person can stand from a crouch. The initial contact from a male lion at a kill is typically an immediate bite. Males are less precision oriented than females and tend to use raw force, targeting the head, neck, or upper body. The guide's warning shots cause the lion to withdraw rather than stay on the target. When the guide reached Travis, the injuries almost certainly to the skull and neck, given the crouched position Travis was in, were already fatal. The rest of the group reported hearing almost nothing beforehand. Officials determined a fresh kill had been made roughly 40 yards from the trail. The lion hadn't reacted to the group moving as a unit, only to the individual who fell behind and stopped alone inside the perimeter it was defending. The next came from standing still at exactly the wrong moment. It was November 3rd, 2013, and the Luangwa River in Zambia ran at the level the early dry season produces, lower than flood peak, but substantial, moving with steady force between eroded clay banks shaped over centuries. Game trails pressed deep after months of consistent use ran between the water and the inland grazing areas, reliable in the way geography is reliable. Those corridors don't account for whoever happens to be standing in them. Ryan Young was 34 from Alberta, working as a fitness instructor who'd taken up wildlife photography as a reason to travel with purpose. He'd researched the Luangwa Valley systematically beforehand: lion behavior, crocodile territoriality, what made elephants dangerous. He hadn't given comparable attention to hippos, mentioning to others that he'd ranked them well below lions, crocodiles, and buffalo. That gap isn't unusual. Hippos fall outside the frame most people build in advance because they don't fit the visual template of a predator. Wildlife researchers in the region have noted the same disconnect for years. Hippos are frequently cited as responsible for more human fatalities annually than lions, leopards, and elephants combined. Yet they remain absent from the mental shortlist most travelers assemble before a trip. A lion attack reads as a dramatic, narratively coherent event, while a hippo encounter often reads beforehand as nothing happening at all. They're simply an animal on a path it has used for years, and a person who happened to be standing on it.
I understand exactly how that blind spot forms. You read everything you can find, and your attention gravitates towards the animal that looked the part: the teeth, the claws, the obvious silhouette.
A hippo doesn't register the same way, but that's what blinds us. They don't look dangerous. The common hippopotamus is the third largest land animal on Earth, behind only the elephant and the white rhino. An adult male can weigh up to 9,000 pounds, and hippos are among the continent's most consistently dangerous large mammals. Their danger isn't predatory, it's territorial. They spend daylight in or near water and move inland to graze in the cooler hours, returning along fixed paths worn into the ground over years. A hippo returning along one of these routes does not redirect around an obstacle. It moves through or over whatever is in the way. During a guided walk along the Luangwa, Ryan spotted a large hippo partially submerged about 60 yards out, surfacing at calm, measured intervals, the kind of stationary subject that rewards patient photography. He stepped slightly away from the group for a cleaner angle into a stand of tall grass at the bank's edge. The decision to move slightly away wasn't reckless. It was reasonable, a minor adjustment for a calm animal at real distance. What made it fatal had nothing to do with the hippo he was watching and everything to do with what was moving toward him through the grass beside him. A second hippo, grazing inland that morning, was returning to the river along an established trail that ran directly through the grass Ryan had chosen. The trail's curve kept its approach concealed until it was within a few yards of him. The hippo came around the concealed curve in the trail at close quarters, already at a distance where its mass made the outcome immediate. A common hippo at up to 9,000 pounds does not need speed to be lethal. Its primary weapon is its jaw. An adult male hippo can open its mouth to nearly 180 degrees and produces a bite force of approximately 1,800 pounds per square inch, with lower canine tusks that can exceed 20 inches. At the moment Ryan turned at the sound behind him, the animal was already within striking range. The impact, either a strike from the body mass or an immediate bite, would have been overwhelming. Hippos do not linger over a target the way a predator does. The animal continued down the trail to the river exactly as it always had, indifferent. Ryan was found moments later by the guide. The injuries were consistent with a hippo's close-range response, massive blunt trauma, and bite wounds to the torso. The guide and the rest of the group reached him within moments. The hippo continued to the river, following the path it always had. What the investigation laid out afterward was almost geometric. The trail ran directly through where he'd stopped. There were fresh tracks and a recent dung deposit along it, a guide reads automatically, and a person watching a subject 60 yards out in the water never thinks to look for in the grass behind them.
That's the detail that stays with me longest of every story here. He was being careful. He was doing everything a responsible observer does.
He just never looked behind him. One direction, that's the entire difference between this outcome and a different one.